Her paleness wasn't very good. "Is it possible you are feeling unwell yourself, milady?" Maomao asked. She hadn't quite meant to say that, it was an occupational hazard. Eilin's eyes widened. "Goodness, do I look ill? I admit I have been somewhat nervous with this banquet coming. If you have no particular complaint, well and good," Maomao said. She had no reason to ask more questions. "Yes, all is well," Eilin said. She almost seemed to be talking to herself, and there was a distant look in her eyes. It lasted only a second, though. She quickly focused on Maomao again. "Thank you, I had heard that you were exceptional among all the court ladies. I hope for much from you. No pressure then." Eilin leaned forward and the smell grew stronger again. "Seriously, what is that?" Maomao wondered. She was still wondering as she left Eilin's room. That clinging scent, the smell, wasn't the only thing that seemed to hang in the air. Questions about Sheo nagged at her. She thought she had several of the clues she needed, but it wasn't enough yet to reach an answer. There were still a few more pieces of this puzzle to be found. "I am sure my old man would have figured it out ages ago." She sighed in dismay at her own inexperience and made her way back to the medical office. In theory, a formal dinner should be a pleasant activity, passed in ease and relaxation. Not so in high society. The middle of the room featured a single long table. Chairs were placed along both sides, and another table stood at the head of the room. The emperor and empress sat at the far end. Jinshi and the shrine maiden, their invited guest, joined them. She wore a veil to protect herself from the sun. Dignitaries from other countries were also attending the formal dinner. However, most of them were from vassal states, and they were treated accordingly. The rest of the crowd lined the long table. The seating arrangement was much like it had been at the garden parties. The difference was that this time they were indoors and had chairs. Maomao stood by the wall, looking as if she hoped it would be over soon. She noticed most of the food tasters were attending the emperor, the guests, and the consorts. They were attending the really important people. He does not need his own food taster, she thought. She watched the unusual strategist from behind and resisted the urge to vomit. He was of medium build and slightly hunched. Aside from his monocle, he was a plain man. There wasn't much to distinguish him from anyone else you might meet. It was strange to think he commanded the nation's army. For the most part, that title was as much honorary as anything else. His official station was Grand Commandant, but Maomao didn't know what that entailed. She only knew his seat indicated a position of quite high status. If he thought he would need a food taster, why did he bother to come? The faces of those around the strategist suggested they were thinking the same thing. When the old man got bored, he would distract himself by playing little pranks on people nearby. That is why no one complained when he missed garden parties and other important functions. Having him, there was not an improvement. The unusual man appeared to get bored very quickly on this occasion and started whispering to the man beside him, who looked like a soldier. Maomao glowered at him and tugged on a cloth she was holding. The cloth was attached to a string that was tied around the freak's ankle. Each time she pulled on it, he flinched in his seat. He would look back and an expression of bliss would cross his face. Then he would sit up straight again. Maomao had heard of leading someone around by the nose, but leading them around by the ankle was new to her. It made her skin crawl when he kept glancing at her. However, that was how the game would be played today. Lahan, a man known for his stinginess, did not want to pay for a separate babysitter for the strategist at the formal dinner. He told Maomao to handle it in addition to her food-tasting duties. She wasn't overly concerned with what he wanted, but her old man had made a personal request. He even promised her some unusual medicine from abroad in exchange. And so, they ended up tying a string to the strategist's ankle, much like mice putting a bell on a cat. Maomao could not shake the sense that people were giving them strange looks. She contented herself with the assumption that the looks were for the freak. Since nobody was audacious enough to say anything, she did not let it bother her. Somehow, food is never actually the first order of business at a formal dinner. Other things always have to happen before you can eat. The music was nice, though it wasn't like the wild sword dances at the outdoor garden party. It sounded a little foreign. Perhaps the musicians were trying to make it sound Shea-Hanese. Lahan sidled up to her and said, "This song was written about the shrine maiden." Consort Eilin wrote it herself. She received a little help from a professional songwriter, but still it is not a bad piece of work. The consort wrote this, Maomao said and glanced toward Eileen. The foreign woman sat among the other middle consorts, smiling as she listened to the music. I know things may be complicated between them now, but I believe the consort is grateful to the shrine maiden, Lahan said. Consort Eileen says that when she was an apprentice, the shrine maiden ensured she received a proper education. You may know some women in Sheol find themselves married off even earlier than they do here. Yes, Maomao had heard something like that, rumors that the people of the sand sometimes took brides who were barely 10 years old. And a girl with no education can't even run away from the marriage she is sent into. True enough, it happened in Li as well. Women unable to escape their husbands, no matter how cruel they were, because if they left their marriages there would be no work that they could do. Someone would eventually trick them and sell them to a brothel. Maomao believed ignorance was a sin. She also knew that knowledge wasn't given equally to everyone. If her old man hadn't educated her himself, she would have ended up serving patrons at the verdigris house. Eileen also received an education from the shrine maiden. She could have thought it was simply her right, but instead she was grateful for it. Even so, she still tries to exploit the shrine maiden's weaknesses. I suppose gratitude does not make the world any less cruel. Maomao sighed. It appeared the strategist had no interest in the music. He had pulled a book about Go from the folds of his robe and started reading. Maomao tugged the string again. He would be lucky if the emperor did not decide to put the next string around his neck. Then, a self-important person gave a self-important speech, and finally the food started. Nen stood just behind Jinshi. He might have preferred Sukan to be attending her instead. However, this was likely her doing. She had noticed that most of the ladies in waiting were young. That led her to let Nen do the job. At least it means Nen is getting along all right, Maomao thought. She could not pretend to be completely disinterested. Nen kept stealing glances to one side, specifically the side on which the shrine maiden sat. Jinshi had Nen to attend him, and the shrine maiden had Yao. Yao looked pale, perhaps from nerves. Seeing Yao somewhat brightened Nen's deathly pallor from that morning, but she still needed more of her young mistress. She looked around, clearly hoping the formal dinner would end soon. She worried about Yao's bad color. Maomao could not help being amused by the thought that they had tested and trained to become medical assistants. Yet all three of them were standing here as food tasters, a station normally occupied by the lowborn and the expendable. Yao came from a better family than most. Maomao was surprised and even a little worried that her parents hadn't tried to stop this assignment. At least I could teach her the basics, she thought. No matter how skilled you were, things could eventually go wrong as a food taster. A new poison would appear or you would ingest a slow-acting toxin. I guess everyone goes when it is their time. It was as simple as that. If Maomao was going to die, she hoped she could do it while sampling some new kind of poison. She especially hoped to last long enough to savor the effects before expiring. Perhaps that was being greedy. But a girl could dream. The first course arrived. Maomao took the small plate with the food taster's sample on it. She could feel the strategist watching her. She just hoped the tasting would be uneventful so they could begin the meal. They did get on with things, and the formal dinner was soon over. Next would be the banquet. This perplexed and annoyed Maomao, as she had no idea what the difference was. This apparently meant relocating and including fewer people. Yao and Nen would be on duty again, but Maomao was finished for the day. This was a good reason to leave the room and remove her strategist persona. Just as she was about to do so, there was a crash. She turned and saw a court lady collapsed on the ground. It was Yao. Mistress, Nen cried and quickly went to her. She tried to prop Yao up. Maomao threw her string away and went over to help. Yao had pitched forward and the floor was covered with vomit. Other court ladies nearby began screaming. Someone was shrieking about the insolence of retching in front of so many extremely important people. It seemed someone was not seeing the real problem. Mistress, mistress, Nen yelled, shaking Yao's shoulders and slapping her cheeks. Make sure none of it is still in her mouth, Maomao commanded. If it lodges in her throat, she could suffocate. Right, said Nen, getting herself under control enough to plunge a finger into Yao's mouth. The other woman appeared to be breathing. However, she was trembling and holding her stomach, and her pupils were dilated. If Yao collapsed. Then what had happened to the shrine maiden? A crowd had already formed around her. The other woman who had been tasting with Yao was white as a sheet. She did not look very steady on her feet. She moved away, her hands pressed to her mouth. The shrine maiden left as well, so they were poisoned too. Maomao laid a blanket over the trembling Yao. NN kept wailing, "Mistress, mistress." She was as pale as any of the poisoned women. Water, salt water, and Maomao pulled NN off of Yao. They did not know what kind of poison they were dealing with, so the best they could do was to try to empty the contents of her stomach. Maomao shoved a finger down Yao's throat, trying to induce further vomiting. Then an old man hobbled up. "Maomao, NN, let me handle this." It was her old man carrying a carafe and a bucket. He also had another blanket which he used to support Yao's hips. If there was stomach pain and vomiting, there was a good chance diarrhea would be present as well. The blanket was a small kindness, a way of making it less obvious if she soiled herself. Liu Hemin said, "You need to tend to the shrine maiden." He continued, "I can take care of Yao." He tugged on the string Maomao had left loose. This drew the attention of the unusual strategist, who had been standing quietly. "Bring me some charcoal, would you? Powder it in a mortar if possible. And get some rooms ready, somewhere we can examine these young ladies and the shrine maiden. I trust you can do that much, Lacan." "Yes, of course, uncle. I'll prepare them right away." It was the strategist who answered, but his subordinates jumped into action. It was faster to have the strategist give the orders than Liu Hemin trying to get people to listen to him himself. "Take care of Yao, Pops," Maomao said, and then she made her way over to the shrine maiden. Chapter 17, The Suspect. The shrine maiden and the other women were quickly moved to their sick rooms. The shrine maiden and the second food taster were vomiting a great deal. It was crucial to give them salt water to ensure their stomachs were completely empty. They were also given powdered charcoal and laxatives. It wasn't the most pleasant tasting stuff, but it was necessary to clear them out. Maomao's father still couldn't examine the shrine maiden, so the responsibility fell to Maomao. She wanted to empty their stomachs completely and also clear out their guts. If the laxatives did not work, she was ready to administer medicine directly into their anuses to induce the purging she needed. She doubted either of them would be eager for that. Thankfully, the laxatives did their job. Both the shrine maiden and the second food taster were doing better than Yao. They showed symptoms of poisoning, but at least they were still conscious. Yao was in dire shape, and NN, entirely forgetting whom she now served, stayed with her constantly. Maomao assumed Jinchi wasn't a monster and would let NN be. The day after the banquet, when the shrine maiden's condition had stabilized somewhat, Jinchi paid Maomao a visit. He was dressed more plainly than usual, but his sparkliness remained. Basin, who had now recovered, was with him. Maomao was still wearing the outfit from the day before. She hadn't even had a chance to bathe. However, this was not the time to worry about such things. Jinchi asked, "How is the shrine maiden?" "She is calmer. Her condition was not as severe as Yao's or the other woman, who was carefully tasting her food. An apprentice physician was reporting every detail of Yao's progress to her. She then told him how the shrine maiden was doing. If anything happened to the maiden, it could become an international incident. They could not allow things to get any worse. No doubt the same concern had brought Jinchi here so promptly. Yao, yes, that was her name. She is the one NN refers to as her mistress. You seem to have grown quite fond of NN, but perhaps you could give her back to us one of these days. I fear she might die from a lack of Yao. NN must have been extremely worried with Yao in such a state. As for Maomao, she was feeling composed enough now to make a joke. Was it gallows humor? Perhaps. Would some consider it impertinent? Maybe so. That was how you got by. Are you not worried about your colleague? I am worried. I am not that cold-blooded. But my job at this moment is to care for the shrine maiden. Besides, my father is looking after Yao. Maomao had faith he would find a way to help her. NN knew quite a bit about medicine. If she stayed composed, she could be a very effective nurse. Maomao did not need to take on more work. Li's international relations depended on the shrine maiden's health. It was very important that nothing happened to her. If I may ask, did they discover who poisoned the shrine maiden? Only the maiden and those with her had become ill. This meant that even if the women survived, it was clearly an attempt on the shrine maiden's life. The sooner they could find and punish the culprit, the better. Jinshi looked pained. Then he glanced at Basin. The other man made a rather odd expression, but he took something wrapped in cloth from the folds of his robes. It turned out to be a small bottle. Maomao opened the lid and discovered some kind of powder. "What's this?" she asked, taking a sniff. The odor was familiar. She had smelled it very recently, in fact. She gasped when she realized what it was and reached for the bottle, but Basin wrapped it up again. "I take it you know something," Jinshi said. "Is that incense powder?" she asked. "Yes, it is. Incense powder was made from plant material including shikimi. It was intensely poisonous and caused vomiting, stomach pains and diarrhea. Dr. Kan informed me that it is poisonous," Jinshi said. "He is right. Its effects are exactly the ones we saw yesterday. Symptoms could occur at any time within several hours after ingesting the poison." Jinshi studied Maomao's face. "This particular bottle was found with Consort Eileen. I knew it. She had smelled that odor when she was distributing the mosquito-repellent incense. The incense had been in Consort Eileen's room. Yao, the shrine maiden, and the shrine maiden's other food taster had all been poisoned, but Yao was in by far the worst shape. Her symptoms would lessen, then return. Now, 3 days after the incident, she was in much better condition, but they still could not relax. Maomao took over Yao's place at the shrine maiden's villa, staying there to minister to the maiden and her servant. Their symptoms were not severe, so Maomao's presence was mostly a precaution. The more pressing question was who had planted the poison. It appears Eileen is involved once again. Why would a woman from Sheo poison the Sheahni's shrine maiden? Hadn't she been trying to get the shrine maiden to help her? Had this been her real goal from the moment she entered the Rhea Palace? Didn't she supposedly feel indebted to the woman she had just allegedly tried to murder? For the moment, she is a suspect, Maomao thought. There was evidence against her. The incense powder had been found in her robes. One of her ladies-in-waiting had discovered it while helping her change and reported it. Maomao knew some facts. For instance, Eileen had obtained a large quantity of the poisonous incense powder before the banquet. Also at the banquet, she had been seated by her compatriot, the shrine maiden. Maomao also knew that Eileen was not watched constantly. She had been alone when Maomao arrived with the incense, with not even a lady-in-waiting attending her. Perhaps Eileen had waited for the right moment at the banquet to poison the food. This possibility could not be ruled out. The witness testimony and the circumstantial evidence were enough to justify questioning Eileen personally. We have to find the perpetrator as soon as we can, before it becomes a diplomatic problem. But what if the culprit is someone from the same country? That would be awfully convenient for Li. The attempted murder of the shrine maiden could be passed off as a civil dispute between Sheahni's visitors. Yes, if Eileen were responsible, that would make everything very simple. Maomao wondered what Lahan would do. The image of the numbers-obsessed little man floated through her mind. This had all begun when he and Eileen discussed either sending food to Shea or giving her political asylum. Lahan was too clever to let himself be caught in the fallout of this incident, but it could not be any fun for him regardless. There must be more to this, Maomao thought. There were too many questions and too many things that didn't fit. She didn't like it at all. On the morning of the 5th day, the shrine maiden's attendant informed Maomao, "The honored shrine maiden is quite fine now. You may go. I'm not sure she looks well yet myself," Maomao responded. "The trouble is of the heart." How could she feel well considering who was involved? Fair enough. It would be a difficult experience to be nearly assassinated in a distant country. It would be even harder to know the would-be killer was from her own homeland. I understand. Was it an acquaintance of hers? Yes, the other woman said after a moment. She might have become the next shrine maiden once. It sounds like my information is solid. She and her cousin Isla both lived with the honored shrine maiden until the age of 12. The attendant sighed, as if to say how could this have happened. Maomao wondered as well, but it wasn't her place to ask too many questions. Instead she simply said, "Thank you." A carriage was waiting for Maomao when she left the shrine maiden's villa. She climbed aboard and found her father inside. "Is Yao all right?" she asked for the moment. "NN is watching her. She will let me know if the young lady takes a turn for the worse." Maomao had heard that Yao had been briefly stable, then worsened, and then stabilized again. It was clear her condition still needed caution. Therefore, if her father was here, there had to be a reason, and so it proved. Looking out the window, the old man said, "We will not be going back to the medical office. We will go right past it." Going past the medical office meant they were heading into the part of the court where the important people lived. Maomao considered why they might be going there. "Is this about the dinner?" she asked. Maomao and her father had been caring for those who had been poisoned at the event. With Eileen under suspicion, it was not surprising the authorities would want to speak to Maomao and Liumen. The carriage moved past the medical office and toward Jinchi's palace. "Please come in," Sugen greeted them, polite as ever. Maomao thought she caught a fleeting hint of a grin when the silver-haired woman looked at her. She was a cunning old thing.